Imagine getting into an Uber at midnight, only to realize your passenger has been dead for months. Or worse, you're being driven by someone who isn't really an Uber driver at all. Tonight, I'm sharing 4 terrifying true Uber stories that will make you check your backseat every single time. These aren't fiction. These are real encounters, from real people who barely escaped with their lives. If you're new to Mysterious Clicks, hit that subscribe button right now, because we bring you the most bone-chilling true horror stories every week. And if you're already part of the family, drop a comment with your scariest ride experience. Let's dive into these 4 stories that prove sometimes the real monster isn't hiding in the dark, it's sitting right behind you.
My name's Marcus. I'm 28, and I used to manage a bookstore before it closed down in 2020. I started driving for Uber to pay my student loans, and most nights were fine. Interesting people, decent tips, nothing unusual. But one Friday night in late October changed everything. Some rides you never forget, and some mysteries you wish you'd never encountered. It was a Friday night in late October, a little after midnight. The air had that crisp autumn chill that makes you pull your jacket tighter, and the streets were mostly empty, except for the occasional car passing by. I had just dropped off a passenger at a hotel near the outskirts of town, when my app pinged with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Nothing unusual about that. I'd picked up people from there before. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it without thinking twice and started heading over, my car's heater barely working against the cold, the worn steering wheel familiar under my gloved hands. When I arrived, the area was eerily quiet. The strip mall's parking lot was illuminated by just a few dim lights, most of them flickering like they were struggling to stay alive. There were no other cars in sight, and the bowling alley itself looked completely closed. Windows dark, neon signs off, not a soul around. But standing alone under one of the streetlights was a man. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, hands shoved deep in his pockets, and he was perfectly still, like a statue waiting under that pale yellow light. I rolled down my window slightly and called out, "You, Derek." He turned his head slowly toward me, and even from a distance, something about his movements felt off. Too deliberate, too controlled. He nodded once and walked toward my car. As he opened the back door and slid into the seat behind me, I caught a whiff of his cologne, expensive, but stale, like it had been sitting on his skin for way too long. The interior light briefly illuminated his face, and I noticed his skin looked pale, almost grayish in the harsh lighting. His eyes had dark circles underneath them, and when he breathed, it sounded labored, like he'd been running even though he'd just been standing still. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, his voice hoarse and dry. I nodded and confirmed the destination on my app. A residential address about 15 minutes away on the other side of town. "No problem, man. Buckle up and we'll get you there," I said, trying to sound friendly. He didn't respond, just stared out the window as I pulled out of the parking lot. The first few minutes of the drive were silent, except for the low hum of my car's engine and the occasional sound of distant traffic. I kept glancing at Derek in my rearview mirror, something I do with all my passengers out of habit. But with him, it felt different. He wasn't looking at his phone like most people do. Instead, he was staring out the window with this intense focus, like he was searching for something in the darkness. His hands were resting on his knees, and I noticed his fingers were trembling slightly. I tried to make conversation to break the uncomfortable silence. Cold night, huh? I said. He didn't answer right away, and when he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. I had to leave, he said. Not I'm leaving or I left, but I had to leave. The phrasing struck me as odd, but I didn't push it. Then he added, almost to himself, they said I could come back. They promised. A nervous laugh escaped his lips, but it was hollow, empty of any real humor. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. In my 6 months of driving for Uber, I developed a kind of sixth sense about passengers. You learn to read people quickly in this job. Who's friendly, who's drunk, who might be trouble. And Derek was setting off every single alarm bell in my head. I tried to focus on the road, but my palms were getting sweaty inside my gloves, and my heartbeat was starting to quicken. I watched him in the rearview mirror as we passed under streetlights, and each time the light hit his face, he looked more gaunt, more hollow. His jaw was clenched tight, muscles working beneath his skin like he was grinding his teeth. Then I noticed his phone. It lit up 3 times during the drive, vibrating silently in his jacket pocket. Each time, the screen briefly illuminated the back seat with a cold blue glow, and I could see the caller ID said, "Unknown caller." Derek never even glanced at it. He just kept staring out the window, breathing that strange labored breath. As we got closer to the destination, the neighborhood changed. We left the well-lit commercial area and entered a residential zone where the houses were spaced farther apart, and the streetlights became fewer. A visit bid. The address led us down a narrow street lined with old trees, whose bare branches created twisted shadows across the pavement. Finally, my GPS indicated we'd arrived. I pulled up in front of a 2-story house that immediately made my stomach drop. It wasn't just dark, it looked abandoned. The lawn was completely overgrown with weeds, reaching up past the windows. The mailbox was hanging at an odd angle like it had been hit by something. And one of the upstairs windows had a visible crack with duct tape stretched across it in an X pattern. No lights were on anywhere in the house, no cars in the driveway, no signs of life at all. I turned slightly in my seat to look back at Derek. "We're here, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Derek wasn't moving. He was sitting perfectly still, staring at the house with an expression I can only describe as pure terror. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his mouth was slightly open. The trembling in his hands had spread to his whole body. I could see him shaking even in the dim light. "Derek," I said, louder this time. "You okay?" He didn't acknowledge me. Instead, he whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "They said I could come back. They promised." His voice cracked on the last word. Them, louder, almost panicked. But what if they lied? What if they're still angry? I felt my own fear rising. "Who's they?" "Derek, are you in some kind of trouble? You need me to call someone?" I reached for my phone, my hand hovering over it, unsure of what to do. And then it happened. I heard the car door open. The sound was unmistakable, that heavy click of the latch releasing, followed by the rush of cold air that poured into the car, like water breaking through a dam. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath mist in front of my face. I heard the door slam shut with a force that made the whole car shake. My heart was pounding in my chest as I spun around in my seat to look at the back seat. It was empty. Completely, impossibly empty. Derek was gone. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. I reached back and touched the seat where he'd been sitting. It was cold, no residual warmth from a body, no indent in the fabric. Nothing. I threw open my door and stumbled out into the street, looking around frantically. The sidewalk was empty. The yard was empty. There was nowhere he could have gone in the 2 seconds between the door opening and closing. No one can move that fast. No one. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app, desperate for some kind of explanation, some proof that this had actually happened. The trip was listed as completed. But when I looked at the payment details, my blood ran cold. It said, $0. Rider cancelled. But Derek never cancelled. I was with him the entire time. The ride was completed. I delivered him to his destination. But according to the app, he'd cancelled before we even arrived. The pickup location was still listed, the bowling alley, but the destination now showed as Moons. Unknown location. Not the address I'd driven to. Unknown location. I stared at my phone screen, reading and rereading those words, trying to make sense of something that had no sense to make. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing Derek's terrified face, hearing his whispered words about them and their promises. The next morning, I drove back to the strip mall in daylight, hoping that somehow everything would make more sense. The bowling alley was open, music playing inside, the sound of pins crashing echoing into the parking lot. I went inside and asked the manager if he knew anyone named Derek, if anyone by that description worked there or had been there Friday night. He looked at me like I was crazy and told me they didn't have security cameras in the parking lot, and no one matching that description worked there or had been there that night. They'd closed at 10 p.m., 2 hours before I picked Derek up from that exact spot. I still drive for Uber because bills don't pay themselves and I can't afford not to work. But everything changed after that night. I bought a small dashboard camera that records the interior of my car, and I keep it running during every single ride now. I've learned to trust my instincts in a way I never did before. When someone feels wrong, they usually are. I just hope I never find out what Derek was running from, or what he was running to, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't getting an answer, it's realizing that some questions were never meant to be answered. About a week after that night, I was finishing up my shift around the same time, same area. My app pinged with a new request. The pickup location made my blood turn to ice. The bowling alley, the same exact spot, and the name on the ride, Derek. My finger hovered over the accept button for a long moment, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I declined it. The request came through again 30 seconds later. Same location, same name. I declined it again, my hands shaking. It came through a third time, and this time I just turned off the app entirely and drove home in silence, checking my rearview mirror the entire way, half expecting to see Derek sitting in my back seat, staring at me with those hollow, terrified eyes. The request never came through again after that night. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through empty streets, I catch myself looking in the rearview mirror a little too long, wondering if one day I'll see him there again, still trying to get home to a house that doesn't want him back.
My name is Jessica. I'm 25, and I dropped out of nursing school to care for my sick mother. I started driving Uber full-time because I needed flexible hours, and honestly, I found the night shifts peaceful. Most people think it's dangerous for a woman to drive alone at night, but I felt safe. That is, until I picked up Chris on a cold November evening. What happened that night made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. Most people think driving at night is dangerous, especially for a woman alone, and maybe they're right. But honestly, I found it peaceful. There's something about the quiet streets, the empty roads, the way the city looks different after midnight. I liked the solitude, The time to think, the endless playlist of sad songs I'd put on between rides. I'd gotten comfortable with it. Too comfortable, maybe. Because comfort makes you careless, and carelessness makes you vulnerable to things you should have seen coming. It was early November, the first real cold snap of the season, and my car's heater was barely working. I was wearing gloves with the fingers cut off so I could still use my phone, a heavy jacket, and I had the heat cranked as high as it would go, which wasn't saying much. It was just after 1 a.m. on a Saturday when the request came through. The pickup location was an apartment complex on the east side of town. The passenger's name was Chris. I accepted it and headed over. The apartment complex looked run down even in the dark. It was one of those older buildings from the 70s, 3 stories tall, with exterior staircases and walkways that faced the parking lot. Several units had windows boarded up with plywood, and the parking lot itself only had one working light, which was flickering on and off like a dying heartbeat. There were no other cars around, which struck me as strange for a Saturday night. Usually these complexes are packed with vehicles. He was probably in his mid-30s, wearing a thin gray hoodie that looked more like a sweatshirt than a jacket, completely inappropriate for the freezing temperature. No coat, no bag, nothing in his hands. His face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes so pronounced they looked like bruises, and he had several days' worth of stubble covering his jaw. When he opened the back door and slid into the seat, the smell hit me immediately. Mold and something else, something sweet and rotten that I couldn't quite place. It made my stomach turn. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice was so hoarse and raspy it sounded like he'd been screaming for hours. Nobody else would accept the ride. I glanced at my app and realized he was right. The ride had been declined by 3 other drivers before it got to me. I felt a small pang of unease but pushed it down. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe they were ending their shifts. It didn't have to mean anything. I confirmed the destination, a house about 20 minutes away in a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with, and started driving. For the first few minutes, Chris didn't say anything. He just sat in the back seat, shivering despite the heat I had blasting, staring out the window with this intense, haunted look on his face. I tried to focus on the road, but something about his presence made me want to fill the silence. "Cold night to be out without a jacket," I said, trying to sound casual and friendly. He turned his head slowly toward me, and in the rearview mirror I saw his eyes. They looked exhausted, defeated, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I don't have one anymore," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "I used to be a teacher, 3rd grade. The kids loved Halloween, I loved it too." Everything he said was in past tense, used to be. Loved, like it was all over. I felt myself softening toward him despite the unease. He seemed sad more than dangerous, broken more than threatening. "That sounds nice," I said. "Why did you stop?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I haven't left the apartment in 3 weeks. Couldn't, not allowed." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "Not allowed by who?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the window, his breath fogging up the glass. "I thought if I could just get to my brother's house, it would stop," he whispered. "They can't follow me there. They can't. That's not how it works." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Chris, who can't follow you?" But he just shook his head and started crying silently, tears streaming down his face, reflecting the passing streetlights. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pull over, call someone, get him help. He clearly wasn't well. But another part of me, the part that had been driving strangers around for 2 years, told me to just get him where he needed to go and let someone else handle it. We drove in heavy silence for another 10 minutes. The only sound his occasional sniffling and the hum of the engine. I kept sneaking glances at him in the mirror, and every time I looked, he seemed more agitated, more frightened. His breathing was getting faster, more shallow. Then we turned onto his brother's street, and everything changed. The house was a small single-story home in an older neighborhood. Every light was off. The yard was neat but empty. Normal. Ordinary. Except Chris started hyperventilating the moment he saw it. "No, no, no," he gasped, his voice rising in panic. "They're still in the house. They never left. Why did I think they'd leave?" He was rocking back and forth now, arms wrapped around himself. "Chris, what are you talking about? Who's in the house?" I asked, my own fear starting to build. He didn't answer me. Instead, he grabbed the door handle, then froze, his whole body going rigid. He turned to look at me, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes. They were wide, pupils dilated so large they looked almost black, and they were reflecting the streetlight in a way that didn't seem right, didn't seem human. "You should drive away," he said, his voice suddenly calm, unnaturally calm. "Right now, don't look back." And then everything happened at once. I smelled something burning, but there was no smoke. The temperature in the car dropped so fast I could suddenly see my breath misting in front of my face despite the heater running full blast. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Chris pulled the door handle, and I heard it click open. Cold air rushed in, and he stumbled out of the car, still staring at the dark house. I should have driven away, like he said. Every instinct was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't. I sat there frozen, watching him in my rearview mirror as he stood on the sidewalk, swaying slightly. Then he started walking toward the house, slow and mechanical, like someone sleepwalking. He reached the front door, put his hand on the knob, and stopped. He stood there for what felt like forever. And then I heard him say, loud enough for me to hear through the open car door, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come back." The front door swung open. Not like someone opened it. It just swung open on its own, revealing complete darkness inside. Chris walked in, and the door slammed shut behind him with such force that I heard it echo down the street. That's when I finally moved. I reached back and pulled the car door closed, locked all the doors, and drove away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove for 2 blocks before I had to pull over. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I grabbed my phone and called the Uber support line, but when the representative answered, I couldn't explain what happened. How could I? "I think my passenger might be having a mental health crisis," was all I managed to say. They told me they'd follow up and thanked me for calling. It felt completely inadequate. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that Chris was just a troubled person having a breakdown, that there was a rational explanation for everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Eventually, I drove home, took a long hot shower, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I kept seeing Chris's face, hearing his words. "They're still in the house." The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I drove back to that house in broad daylight. I needed to see it again, needed to prove to myself that it was just a normal house, that I'd let fear and darkness play tricks on my mind. When I pulled up, the house looked different in the sunlight, older, more run-down than I'd realized. The lawn was dead and yellow, mail was piled up in the mailbox, and there were no cars in the driveway. It looked abandoned. I sat in my car for a few minutes, working up the courage, then got out and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, a woman's voice called out from next door. "Nobody lives there, honey." I turned and saw an elderly woman standing on her porch wearing a bathrobe and holding a coffee mug. "How long has it been empty?" I asked. She squinted at me. Couple months now. Last tenant got evicted. Neighbors reported screaming at all hours. Police were here almost every week. Poor guy lost his mind, I think. Do you remember what he looked like? I asked, my voice barely steady. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through it, then held it up to show me a photo. It was a neighborhood watch thread or something similar, and there was a picture of a man, mid-30s, dark hair, sunken eyes. It was Chris. My blood turned to ice. That's him, she said. Sad story. They found him in the apartment about 2 months ago. Overdose, the police said. But I heard the screaming that last night. He wasn't alone in there, I'm sure of it. The world tilted around me. 2 months ago. Chris had been dead for 2 months. I'd driven a dead man. I'd talked to a ghost. I'd watched him walk into an abandoned house and disappear. The woman was still talking, but I couldn't hear her over the ringing in my ears. I stumbled back to my car, got in, and sat there staring at the house, trying to process what I just learned. I opened the Uber app with shaking hands and searched for the trip from last night. I needed to see it, needed proof that it had really happened. The trip was there. Chris's ride, the pickup location, the destination. Payment processed, $12.47. But when I tried to click on the trip details to see more information, the app glitched. The screen flickered, went black, then returned to the main page. I tried again, same thing. It was like the ride was there, but also wasn't there, existing in some kind of digital limbo. I tried one more time, and this time the trip disappeared entirely from my history. I scrolled through my entire trip list. It was gone, like it never happened. Except I still had the $12.47 in my account. Blood money. Ghost money. I don't know what to call it. I stopped driving at night after that. I couldn't do it anymore. I took a daytime job at a retail store, even though it pays significantly less, even though it means I'll be in debt longer. I don't care. Some things aren't worth the money. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Chris. I wonder if he found peace, or if he's still trapped somehow, still trying to escape whatever was in that apartment, still trying to get to his brother's house, hoping the darkness won't follow. I wonder if he knows he's dead. I wonder if the screaming the neighbor heard was Chris, or something else. Something that was with him at the end. I've tried to donate that $12.47 3 times now to different charities, but every transaction fails. The money stays in my account like a stain I can't wash out, a reminder of the night I drove a ghost who was still running from something worse than death. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the detail I can't stop thinking about. When I checked my ride requests this morning, just out of morbid curiosity, there was one pending request in my history. It had been sent last night at 1:03 a.m. The pickup location was that same apartment complex. The passenger name was Chris. I had never received a notification for it. It just appeared in my history like it had always been there, waiting. I deleted the app entirely after that. Reinstalled it a week later because I needed the money. The request was still there. It's always there. Every time I open the app, there it is. Chris, waiting at that apartment complex, trying to get away from whatever was in his home, whatever followed him into death. And every night I don't accept it. I wonder if he's still standing there in the dark, watching cars pass by, hoping the next driver will be brave enough or foolish enough to take him where he needs to go. I wonder if he'll ever get there. I wonder if any of us really escape the things we're running from, or if we just carry them with us, even after we're gone.
It was a Friday night, about a week before Christmas, and the whole city was lit up with holiday lights. Every house had decorations, stores had their windows done up, Even the streetlights had wreaths hanging from them. It should have felt festive and safe, but those lights also created weird shadows, made it harder to see what was really happening in the darker spaces between the brightness. I had been driving since about 7 p.m., mostly doing short trips taking people to holiday parties or dinner. Around 10:30, I got a request from an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with valet parking and a dress code. The passenger's name was Rachel. I pulled up to the front entrance, where a few valets were still working, helping people into taxis and rideshares. A young woman, probably early 20s, came out wearing black pants and a white button-up shirt with a black apron still tied around her waist. Sir uniform. She had a jacket over it and was carrying a small backpack. Her eyes were scanning the parking lot nervously as she walked quickly to my car. She opened the back door and practically threw herself inside, immediately locking the door behind her. "Thank you so much for getting here so fast," she said, her voice shaky. She was looking out the back window, watching the restaurant entrance. "No problem," I said, trying to sound calm and reassuring. "You okay?" She turned to face me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "I know this is going to sound paranoid, but can you please make sure nobody's following us? I need to know." My protective instincts, the same ones I have with my own daughters, immediately kicked in. "Of course, don't worry, I've got you." I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, checking my mirrors carefully. The restaurant lot was about half full, mostly expensive cars, a few other people getting into vehicles. Nothing immediately suspicious. But then, I noticed a dark sedan parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the overhead lights. It was an older model Honda Civic with heavily tinted windows. The engine wasn't running, but I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. As soon as I pulled onto the street, that car's headlights came on. Zephyros. Rachel saw it too. I heard her breath catch. "That might be him," she whispered. "Okay, just stay calm," I said, my voice steady even though my heart rate was picking up. "Tell me what's going on." As I drove, she explained in a rush of words that tumbled over each other. She had an ex-boyfriend who wouldn't leave her alone. They dated for about 6 months, broke up almost a year ago, but he couldn't let it go. At first it was constant texts and calls, which she blocked. Then he started showing up at places she went, always with some excuse about it being a coincidence. She got a restraining order 4 months ago, after he waited outside her apartment for 6 hours. But restraining orders are just pieces of paper, and he'd violated it multiple times. The police would talk to him, he'd disappear for a few weeks, then start up again. And now he knew where she worked. She had no idea how he found out. She'd been careful, hadn't posted anything on social media, had asked her friends not to tag her in anything. But there he was. I checked my rearview mirror. The sedan was still behind us, maintaining a steady distance of about 3 car lengths. "All right, let's see if it's really him," I said. I took a right turn onto a residential street. The sedan turned. I took another right, then a left, weaving through the neighborhood. The sedan followed every turn. Rachel was gripping the back of my seat now, looking over her shoulder. "It's him. Oh God, it's really him." Her voice was rising in pitch, panic setting in. I felt anger flare up in my chest. What kind of coward stalks a young woman who just wants to live her life? "Listen to me, Rachel," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I'm taking you to the police station, not your house." "Okay," she nodded quickly, tears starting to stream down her face. She pulled out her phone and called someone, her roommate I think, telling her what was happening, giving her my license plate number, just in case. Smart kid. My oldest daughter is almost her age, and I thought about how I'd want someone to protect her, if she were in this situation. I headed toward the police station, which was about 10 minutes away. The sedan stayed with us. I tried speeding up, going 15 over the limit. The sedan sped up. I slowed down suddenly, hoping he'd pass us. He slowed down too. This guy wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He accelerated suddenly and pulled up right behind us, close enough that I could see his silhouette in my rearview mirror, but not his face. Then, he tapped my dumper. Not hard enough to cause damage, but hard enough to send a message. Rachel screamed. "Call 911, I told her, and she did, with shaking hands, trying to explain to the dispatcher what was happening, while I focused on driving. We were on a busier street now, other cars around us, and I was grateful for the witnesses. A red light ahead turned yellow. I made a split-second decision and gunned it, racing through just as it turned red. The sedan followed, running the red light completely, not even hesitating. Horns blared from the cross-traffic that had to slam on their brakes. Finally, I saw the police station ahead, its lights a beacon of safety. I pulled into the parking lot fast, tires squealing slightly, and stopped right in front of the main entrance. Rachel was crying hard now, her whole body shaking. The sedan slowed down as it approached, then pulled over across the street, parking beneath a broken streetlight. The headlights stayed on, aimed right at us. I could feel him watching. "Stay here," I told Rachel, and I got out of the car. A young officer, probably mid-20s, was coming out of the station, having seen our dramatic arrival. I quickly explained the situation, pointed at the sedan. He called for backup and walked across the street to the vehicle, while I waited with Rachel, who had gotten out of my car and was standing close to me, like I was a shield. The officer spent a few minutes talking to whoever was in the sedan, then walked back, looking confused. "Ma'am, that vehicle is registered to a Patricia Ellis, 67 years old," he said, reading from his notepad. "The driver says she's just heading home from visiting her daughter and lives 2 blocks from here. Says it's pure coincidence that she made the same turns you did." Rachel's face went white. "No, that's not right. It has to be him. It has to be." But doubt was creeping into her voice now, and I felt it too. Had I overreacted? Had we both just been paranoid? The officer suggested I take Rachel home, since it clearly wasn't her ex following us. And honestly, I felt foolish. I'd been so sure. "I'm so sorry," Rachel said, as we got back in my car, her face flushed with embarrassment. I swear I thought it was him. "Hey, don't apologize," I said. "Better safe than sorry. Always trust your instincts." But even as I said it, something felt off. We drove to her address, which was about 15 minutes away, in a quiet neighborhood with small rental houses and duplexes. The whole drive, I kept checking my mirrors, but nothing seemed suspicious. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. I pulled up in front of her house, a small single-story place with a neat little yard and a porch light that was on. The street had decent lighting, a few cars parked along the curbs. Everything looked normal, safe. Rachel thanked me profusely, apologized again, and gathered her things. She opened the door and stepped out, and I was about to pull away when something caught my eye. 2 houses down, parked on the same side of the street, was a truck. A lifted Ford, with custom midnight blue paint and chrome accents. It was hard to miss because of the modifications, and something about it triggered a memory. I'd seen this truck before, and then it hit me like a punch to the gut. This truck had been parked on the street outside the restaurant when I picked Rachel up. I'd noticed it, because it was blocking part of the sidewalk. My heart started pounding. "Rachel, wait!" I called out,
but she was already halfway up her walkway. The truck's engine started. Not the headlights, just the engine. A low rumble in the quiet and the test. A low rumble in the quiet night. Rachel froze at the sound and turned back to look at me. Her face went from confusion to pure terror in an instant. She knew that truck. "Get back in the car! Now!" I yelled. She ran back, yanking the door open and diving inside. The truck's headlights came on, and it started rolling forward, slowly at first, then faster. I threw my car into drive and punched the gas, my tires squealing as we took off down the street. "It was a setup," Rachel gasped. "He had someone else follow us. He was always in a different car waiting at my house. Oh my God, he was always one step ahead." Her voice was climbing toward hysteria. I grabbed my phone and hit red dial for 911, trying to drive and talk at the same time. The truck was right behind us now, and I could see it clearly in my rearview mirror. The driver was a man, probably late 20s or early 30s, wearing a baseball cap. He was leaning forward over the steering wheel, like he was hunting us. I explained to the 911 dispatcher that we were being chased, gave my location, described the truck. She told me to head back to the police station, that units were already being dispatched. But the station was across town, at least 15 minutes away. The truck was getting closer, and this guy was driving aggressively, weaving around other cars, running stop signs. I had to make a choice, try to outrun him, which was dangerous for everyone on the road, or find somewhere public and crowded where he couldn't try anything. I saw a 24-hour grocery store ahead, parking lot half full, even at this hour, lights blazing. I whipped into the parking lot and drove right up to the front entrance, slamming on my brakes. People were walking in and out with shopping carts. Witnesses everywhere. The truck pulled into the lot behind us, but stayed back, idling, near the entrance. I could see the driver's face now in the overhead lights, and Rachel let out a sob. "That's him. That's my ex." She was shaking so hard, her teeth were chattering. We stayed there, doors locked, engine running, waiting for the police. It felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes. The truck just sat there, engine running, him watching us. Other shoppers walked by, completely oblivious to the nightmare happening right in front of them. When the police cruisers finally pulled in, lights flashing, the truck tried to leave, but they blocked him in. I watched as they pulled him out of the truck, handcuffed him, searched the vehicle. Rachel was crying harder now, but it was relief mixed with fear. An officer came over to take our statements, and that's when we learned the full scope of what had almost happened. The truck was registered to Rachel's ex, whose name was Brandon Cortez. He had an active restraining order violation warrant. And when they searched his truck, they found a loaded handgun under the driver's seat, zip ties in the glove compartment, and a duffel bag in the back, with duct tape, rope, and bleach. This wasn't just stalking. This was a planned abduction. Maybe worse. Sir, the officer told us that Brandon had been working with his cousin, the woman in the sedan, Patricia Ellis. She'd agreed to follow us to the police station, knowing that would throw us off, make us think we're being paranoid. Meanwhile, Brandon waited at Rachel's house in a completely different vehicle, counting on us to let our guard down once we thought we were safe. It was coordinated, calculated, and it almost worked. If I hadn't noticed that truck, if Rachel had made it inside her house, he would have been waiting. The officer also told us that when they ran Brandon's information, they discovered he'd been arrested 2 years prior for assault against a different ex-girlfriend. He'd only served 6 months. Rachel completely broke down when she heard that. She kept saying, "He was going to kill me. He was really going to kill me," over and over. Police took Rachel to the station to give a full statement, and they asked if I'd come too, since I was a witness. I stayed with her for 3 hours, waiting while they processed everything, making sure she was okay. Her roommate came to pick her up, and before she left, Rachel hugged me and thanked me for saving her life. She said if I'd been like the other drivers who declined her ride, or if I'd just dropped her off without noticing the truck, she wouldn't have survived the night. I didn't know what to say to that. I just hugged her back and told her to stay safe. A few weeks later, I got a call from a detective asking me to testify at Brandon's trial. I agreed immediately. The trial happened about 5 months after that night, and I took a day off to be there. I told the jury everything I witnessed. The chase, the coordination between him and his cousin, the truck waiting at Rachel's house, all of it. The evidence was overwhelming. Brandon got convicted on multiple charges: stalking, violation of a restraining order, attempted kidnapping, illegal possession of a firearm. He was sentenced to 8 years. His cousin Patricia got 2 years for being an accomplice. Rachel sent me a card a few months after the trial. She'd moved to a different state, changed her phone number, was starting over somewhere her ex would never find her. She said she'd started therapy and was slowly rebuilding her life. The card said, "To the man who saw what I couldn't see, thank you for trusting your instincts and protecting me when I needed it most." I keep that card in my glove compartment. I still drive for Uber, and I still think about that night all the time. My daughters make fun of me now, because I'm hyper-aware of everything when I'm driving. Every car behind me, every person on the sidewalk, every detail. They say I'm paranoid. But paranoid means paying attention. Paranoid means noticing when something's off. And that night, paranoid saved Rachel's life. I teach my girls now to always check their ride-share details, to verify the driver, to share their location with friends, to trust that feeling in their gut when something doesn't feel right. Because predators like Brandon don't just happen. They plan, they coordinate, they wait for the moment when you finally let your guard down. And if I can teach my daughters to never let their guard down, to always stay aware, then maybe some good came from that terrifying night when I realized that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they follow you home in a lifted blue truck, waiting for their chance.
It was a Saturday, around 11:30 at night, and the weather was terrible. Rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of downpour that makes your windshield wipers almost useless even on the highest setting. Visibility was poor, the roads were slick, and honestly, I was thinking about calling it a night and heading home. My wife had texted me earlier saying she was already in bed. The kids were at sleepovers with friends, and I had the house to myself if I wanted to come home early and just relax. But then a request came through, and something made me accept it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fate, I don't know. The pickup location was a residential street about 10 minutes away, and the passenger's name was Sarah. I accepted the ride and started driving through the rain, my headlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. What I didn't know then was that Sarah had already been through hell, and I was about to be the first person she felt safe with in what must have felt like an eternity. Sarah's nightmare had started about 45 minutes before I got that request. She was a college student, 22 years old, studying biology with plans to go to medical school. She'd been at a friend's house for a small gathering, nothing crazy, just a few people celebrating the end of midterms. She'd had 2 drinks over the course of 3 hours, eaten plenty of food, and felt completely sober when she decided to head home around 10:30. She opened her Uber app and requested a ride. The app said a driver would arrive in 7 minutes. She stood outside under the porch overhang, trying to stay dry, watching the rain create rivers in the gutters. Then a car pulled up, a gray Toyota Camry, older model, headlights on. The window rolled down, and a man's voice called out, "Sarah, for Uber?" She was cold, tired, ready to get home. She glanced at her phone. The app showed her driver was still 4 minutes away. But she assumed it had glitched, that the timing was off. It happens sometimes with GPS. So she said yes and got in the back seat. The first thing that should have warned her was the smell.
The car reeked of stale cigarettes, and most Uber drivers don't smoke in their vehicles because of the rating system. But she was wet from the rain, uncomfortable, not thinking clearly. The second thing was that he didn't confirm her name properly. He'd asked it as a question, repeating what she'd said, not stating it with certainty like a driver who'd seen it on his app. And the third thing, the thing that should have sent her running, was that the moment she closed the door, he engaged the locks. Not after he started driving. Immediately. She heard the click, felt the subtle shift as all 4 doors locked at once. But by then, it was too late. He pulled away from the curb, and Sarah tried to relax, tried to tell herself everything was fine. She pulled out her phone to check the app, to see the route, to do what we're all supposed to do. And that's when her blood turned cold. There was no active ride showing on her app. No route, no driver information, nothing. Her actual Uber request was still pending, still looking for a driver. She wasn't even Uber at all. "Excuse me," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, trying not to show the panic rising in her throat. "I think you made a mistake. I'm not your passenger." The driver didn't respond. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road. Hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. "Hey," she said louder, "you need to let me out. This is wrong. I'm not supposed to be in this car." Still nothing. They were heading away from her apartment, away from campus, toward a part of town she didn't recognize. Sarah's mind raced. She was pre-med, had taken psychology classes, knew that in crisis situations, your brain can either freeze or activate. She forced herself to think clearly. She tried the door handle, locked, and when she checked, she realized the child locks were engaged. She couldn't open the door from the inside. She thought about screaming, but they were on an empty road with no other cars, no houses with lights on. Who would hear her? She needed a public place, witnesses, somewhere she could make a scene. So she did something incredibly smart and incredibly brave. She pretended to be drunker than she was. She slumped against the door, closed her eyes halfway, mumbled incoherently. She made him think she was less alert, less dangerous than she actually was. And she waited for an opportunity. That opportunity came 5 minutes later when they stopped at a red light, near a commercial intersection. Sarah could see a 24-hour gas station on the corner, lights blazing, a clerk visible through the window. This was it. This was her chance. She lunged forward suddenly, reaching between the front seats, trying to grab the steering wheel, trying to do anything to stop the car or cause a scene. The driver reacted instantly, backhanding her across the face. Pain exploded in her cheek, and she tasted blood in her mouth, but she didn't stop. She kept fighting, kept reaching, and in the chaos her hand found the driver's side door handle. She pulled it. The door swung open while they were still at the light, and the driver had to slam on the brakes or risk falling out. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the center console, pushed past him, and tumbled out of the car onto the wet pavement. She scraped her hands and knees, but she was out. She was free. And she ran. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, toward those gas station lights, while behind her, she heard the car door slam and footsteps pounding after her. But she was younger, faster, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. She burst through the gas station door, screaming for help, and collapsed against the counter, while the stunned clerk reached for the phone to call 911. That's where Sarah's story intersects with mine. I was only about 3 blocks away when I got the request. Same Sarah, new request, but now from the gas station. I pulled up to see police cars and an ambulance already there, lights flashing, red and blue against the rain. My first thought was that there'd been an accident or a robbery. I parked and got out, looking for my passenger, and that's when I saw her. Young woman, soaking wet, bleeding from a split lip, sitting on a curb with a blanket around her shoulders while an EMT checked her over. An officer was taking her statement, and she was crying and talking at the same time, words spilling out in a torrent. I approached cautiously, told the officer I was Sarah's Uber driver, and he filled me in on what had happened. My stomach dropped as I listened. Fake Uber driver, attempted kidnapping, escape, and now Sarah needed a ride home, but was understandably terrified to get in any vehicle. I walked over to her, and when she looked up at me, I saw the fear in her eyes. This woman had just fought for her life and won, and now she was supposed to trust a stranger to drive her somewhere? I wouldn't have blamed her if she refused, but I knew I had to try to help. I introduced myself, showed her my driver's license, my Uber profile on my phone, with my photo and ratings. I showed her pictures of my own kids on my phone, told her about my wife waiting at home, gave her my real name and address. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called my wife on speakerphone, woke her up, and had her confirm who I was, what I was doing, that I was safe. Sarah listened to my wife's sleepy, confused voice asking what was wrong, and something in her posture relaxed slightly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll trust you." Those words broke my heart because I knew how much courage it took for her to say them. The drive to her parents' house, she didn't want to go back to her apartment alone, took about 20 minutes. Sarah sat in the back, door unlocked at her request, window cracked open despite the rain because she said she needed air. And she talked. She talked nonstop, which I later learned is a common trauma response. She told me everything that had happened, every detail, and I listened without interrupting. She said she'd done everything right, didn't drink much, ordered from the official app, was careful. But it almost wasn't enough. The man who picked her up had been waiting, hunting, looking for someone exactly like her. Someone alone, someone distracted by the weather, someone who might not double-check every detail. She described him to me. White male, probably in his 40s, tattoo on his neck that looked like a spider web, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His car was an older gray Toyota Camry, no Uber stickers, no decorations, nothing to identify it. Generic and forgettable. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be remembered. I memorized every detail she gave me, repeated it back to her to make sure I had it right. I told her what the officer had told me. That she survived because she stayed smart, because she fought back, because she trusted her instincts that something was wrong. "You saved yourself," I said. "What you did took incredible courage and intelligence. You're a survivor, Sarah." She broke down crying again, but this time it seemed like a release, like she was finally allowing herself to feel everything she'd been holding back. When we arrived at her parents' house, they were already outside, the porch light on, waiting. Her mother ran to the car before it even stopped, yanked open the door, and pulled Sarah into her arms. Sarah's father, a big man with tears streaming down his face, came around to my window. He tried to pay me, tried to give me cash, tried to thank me in words that kept getting caught in his throat. I refused the money and told him that getting his daughter home safe was all the payment I needed. He hugged me through the car window, and I sat there for a minute after they went inside, just processing everything that had happened. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next few days, I followed the news obsessively, checking for any updates on Sarah's case. And what the police investigation revealed was absolutely horrifying. 3 days after Sarah's escape, police arrested a man named Gerald Simmons, age 43, after he tried the exact same trick outside a downtown bar. But this time, undercover officers were watching, thanks to Sarah's detailed report. They'd been staking out rideshare pickup locations, looking for a gray Camry with a male driver matching Sarah's description. When Simmons approached a woman and claimed to be her Uber driver, they moved in. The woman, who had been about to get in his car, had no idea how close she'd come to disaster. When police searched Simmons's car and his home, they found a storage unit rented under a fake name. Inside were items that still make me sick to think about: zip ties, duct tape, bleach, plastic tarps, a shovel. They also found 2 driver's licenses belonging to young women who'd been reported missing over the past 8 months. One had disappeared after a night out with friends. The other had last been seen waiting for a ride outside her workplace. DNA evidence and forensic analysis led police to a property Simmons owned about 2 hours outside the city. I won't go into details about what they found there. The news reports were graphic enough. But both missing women were recovered. Their families finally had answers, even if those answers were the worst possible outcome. Sarah's escape had not only saved her own life, but had also stopped a serial predator who'd been hunting for months. The investigation revealed that Sarah was actually the 7th woman Simmons had approached using the fake Uber tactic. 4 of the others had realized something was wrong early enough to escape or refuse to get in the car. 2 hadn't been so lucky. And Sarah would have been the 3rd if she hadn't fought back. The trial took place about 6 months later, and I was called to testify about what Sarah had told me that night, the details she'd shared during our drive. The prosecutor said my testimony was important because it showed Sarah's state of mind immediately after the attack, proved the consistency of her story, and demonstrated the impact of the crime. I sat on that witness stand and looked at Gerald Simmons, this ordinary-looking middle-aged man in a suit and tie, clean-shaven, almost forgettable. And I thought about how many times we pass monsters on the street without ever knowing. He showed no emotion during the trial, no remorse, nothing. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: 2 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of attempted kidnapping, assault, and about a dozen other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah attended every day of the trial. I saw her there sitting with her parents, and she looked different than that terrified young woman I'd driven home in the rain. She looked stronger, determined, like she'd taken her trauma and forged it into armor. A few weeks after the trial, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah. She'd graduated from college, had been accepted to medical school, and was moving forward with her life. She wrote that she'd started volunteering with an organization that teaches self-defense and safety awareness to college students. She speaks at orientations and workshops, sharing her story, teaching others the red flags she missed, and the instincts she trusted that saved her life. Her letter thanked me for being someone safe when she needed it most, for listening when she needed to talk, for treating her with dignity and respect when she felt violated and vulnerable. She included a graduation announcement. She'd graduated summa cum laude, and at the bottom she'd written, "To the man who drove me home when I needed it most, you restored my faith that good people still exist." I keep that letter in my glove compartment, next to my registration and insurance papers. I quit driving for Uber about 6 months after all of this. Not because I was afraid, but because I couldn't shake the feeling, the knowledge, of how close it had all been. What if I hadn't been nearby that night? What if I'd already gone home? What if another driver had declined the request? Sarah's survival came down to inches and seconds and split-second decisions. 2 other women didn't get those seconds. Their families will never hear their voices again, never see them graduate or get married or have children. And that weight, that knowledge, it became too heavy for me to carry while doing this job. I still work in IT, still solve problems, still notice patterns. But now I volunteer my time giving rideshare safety presentations at my kids' schools, at community centers, anywhere people will listen. The key points I always emphasize are simple but critical. Always check the license plate against what's shown in your app before you get in. Always check the driver's photo. Always share your trip details with a friend or family member. Always sit behind the driver, not directly behind the passenger seat. Always keep your hand on the door handle. And always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Get out, make a scene, be rude, be wrong, be embarrassed, just be safe. Sarah and I still keep in touch occasionally. She sends me updates about medical school, about her advocacy work, about her life moving forward. Last month she sent me an invitation. She's getting married next summer. The invitation says, "To David Mitchell and family," and includes a handwritten note. "You'll always be part of my story. Thank you for making sure I lived long enough to write the next chapter." I cried when I read that. My wife asked me what was wrong, and I showed her the invitation, and she cried too. We're definitely going to the wedding. And every time I think about that rainy night in March, every time I think about the what-ifs, and the close calls, and the terrible luck that 2 other families had, I'm reminded that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. I answered a ride request I almost declined. I took time to make Sarah feel safe. I listened to her story and remembered the details. And somehow, in some small way, that mattered. That made a difference. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Pay attention, show up. Be someone safe when someone needs it, because you never know when you might be the only thing standing between someone and the worst night of their life. You never know when your simple choice to be kind, to be careful, to be present, might be the reason someone gets to write their next chapter.